This is an extract from the Leader podcast by the Evening Standard, hosted by me, David Marsland. To hear the whole thing, search for us on your podcast provider. This week, Facebook, Amazon, Apple and Google sat before the US Congress and denied they were too big for competition to thrive. Now they've posted their financial figures to the markets, and in the 3 months to June, that's during the height of the pandemic lockdowns, Amazon's profits doubled to more than $5 billion. Apple's revenues up 11% to nearly $60 billion. Facebook blew past analysts' estimates with nearly $19 billion in revenue, and Google's had a not bad pandemic too. Its parent company Alphabet saw profits up 3% to nearly $7 billion. Well, joining me now is a tech expert, Joshua Lowcock from Worldwide. Joshua, I wonder what Congress would have made of these figures if they'd been out when the tech bosses were sitting in front of them.
I think there would have been a different tone of conversation, particularly because we're coming to the end of a social media boycott. And so questions might have been asked, why has there been so little financial impact because of the boycott?
Why has there been so little financial impact? Not just because of the boycott, but during this pandemic at all?
I mean, there's a number of reasons. If you look to the sort of, I'll say the optimistic side of their business, the pandemic's been a boon for e-commerce. And so online advertising and driving e-commerce sales naturally lends itself to digital advertising. I think the other one, and Mark Zuckerberg called it out in his results call, which is the long tail of advertising actually represents the bulk of their revenue. So even though small to medium businesses have been hit hard by the pandemic, they do continue to advertise. And that represents, a significant portion of where they get their income.
Amazon doubled its profits while other even large supermarkets were struggling through this pandemic. Is that a case in point that companies like Amazon are too big and competition can't survive?
I don't think it's a case in point. Online delivery was just a big important factor for everyone when you weren't able to leave home. If anything, there's a lesson for all retailers out of that, which is you need to be much more active and competitive in the online delivery space.
If companies the scale of Amazon, Facebook, Google aren't broken up, should there be more regulation on them anyway?
I think there's an urgent need for regulation of the sector overall. You look at everything from data collection and just general privacy issues, and I know we have GDPR, and in the US, California's brought in CCPA. The other big question mark over all of them is just how vertically integrated they are, whether that's cloud-based computing, to ad serving, to the data and algorithms that make decisions about what gets shown. All of those things are so much of a black box as well. There's a need for oversight on that.
In Australia, they've just passed a new law that will force companies like Google to pay news providers. Is that the right way to go? Will that protect media companies?
I don't know if it'll go the way of protecting media companies. I'm a firm believer in supporting news and journalism in its entirety. And you look at, in the UK, there was the Cairncross review that looked at the impact that large digital companies had on social media, or social media had on news organizations, and they called it a market failure. It actually gets back to your earlier comment and question, which is the bulk of the revenue for these social media platforms comes from the mid to long tail. That was traditionally the revenue source for news organizations. Something does need to be done. I'm not sure whether a tax is the best solution. The problem with the tax is it's very easy for the platforms to opt out of doing what they do, which is aggregating news and engaging with news-based organizations. So the Australian regulation is based on the concept that aggregating news like google.com to google.co.uk/news is actually taking traffic away from news publishers. For all intents and purposes, Google can make a decision to no longer do that and sort of somewhat, absolve itself of legitimately having to be taxed.
Is it possible for a new Facebook to arrive on the scene, or would they get swallowed up by the current Facebook? I mean, there were some suggestions that Mark Zuckerberg bought Instagram just to stop it being competition.
The opening statement by David Sisselin was actually very apt, because there's always the opportunity for competition to emerge, but the existence of competitors doesn't actually equal competition, is something I'm always keen to stress. And you have to keep in mind that one of the big powers of the internet is the network effect. So an alternative to Facebook isn't really a genuine competitive threat, or an alternative to Instagram or Google search, because they benefit from the volume of usage, the fact that your friends and work colleagues are on there, and the absolute collection of data and insights, which enables those platforms to get better. In an abstract sense, yes, an alternative can emerge. Could it be a genuine competitive threat? I mean, TikTok, you could argue, might suggest that, but TikTok has its own headwinds.
Are we likely to see more legislation against these companies in the near future then, across the world, like we've seen coming up with Australia, like America is clearly considering?
I mean, France has floated the idea of taxing social media companies to fund news. So I think that will gain momentum because there's a genuine, legitimate concern about defunding of news organizations. I think regulatory intervention into the platforms in terms of breaking up will be hard because they're global entities. So I encourage regulatory oversight. I wonder what impact a breakup decision in one market can have when truly these are global companies headquartered in the US. So the US needs to lead the fray. I think the one that will be legitimately challenged and investigated by everyone is news as a category and the influence of these platforms and misinformation. And that's something that can be addressed on a local market by market basis because everyone has different laws around misinformation, libel, and censorship.
And just finally, are we expecting these companies, even a pandemic can't stop Amazon, are we expecting these companies to just get bigger?
In the absence of oversight and regulation, absolutely.